It ain't gangster rap. It's the fact that everybody's biting now, and that's whack.
He didn't just make history, he made enemies. Ice Cube has never been the type to play nice or hold his tongue. When someone crossed him, he didn't post a tweet. He dropped a diss track that could end careers. Because for Cube, respect wasn't something you asked for. It was something you demanded. Today, we're diving deep into the 6 artists Ice Cube hated the most, from blood relatives who turned rivals to rap icons who tested his patience. These weren't just beefs, they were battles that defined entire eras of hip-hop. By the end, you'll understand why Ice Cube didn't just survive hip-hop's toughest years, he ruled them. At the top of the list is Eazy-E. There are moments in music history when friendship, fame, and ambition collide so hard that they leave scars no reunion can heal. For Ice Cube, that collision came through his fallout with Eazy-E, a man he once called his brother. Their bond had built NWA, one of the most influential rap groups of all time. But behind the success, Cube began to notice something off. The money wasn't adding up. The contracts were unclear, and the people in charge, mainly Eazy and their manager Jerry Heller, seemed to be living much better than the rest. Cube walked away from the group, a move that shocked fans and enraged his former bandmates. When asked about it later, he told Thrasher magazine, "I'd rather be broke than stay and know I'm getting cheated." It was a public statement that confirmed what many suspected. This wasn't just creative tension, it was about survival and respect. Eazy-E didn't stay silent. He mocked Cube in interviews and sent jabs through underground records, painting Cube as ungrateful and disloyal. The feud simmered, but then came the moment that changed hip-hop forever. Ice Cube's No Vaseline. The track didn't just clap back, it was an all-out demolition. Cube tore into Eazy, Dr. Dre, MC Ren, DJ Yella, and Jerry Heller with raw precision. Every line cut deeper than the last, exposing betrayal, greed, and hypocrisy. It was a lyrical explosion that effectively ended the original NWA era and cemented Cube's reputation as one of the most fearless voices in rap. But behind the fire, there was still humanity. Years later, Cube revealed that there had been plans for him and Eazy to finally talk things through. Time had softened some of the anger. The idea of reconciliation wasn't impossible anymore. They both knew the history between them was bigger than pride. There were conversations, real ones, about meeting, about closing the book properly. Sadly, that meeting never happened. Just months later, Eazy-E passed away unexpectedly. What could have been a moment of forgiveness turned into one of hip-hop's most painful what-ifs.
I see Eazy right before he died. He was talking about, yo, let's get the group back together. You think you can do it? I was like, yo, you work it out with Dre? Come holla at me, you know what I mean? It didn't happen because a few months later, he was sick.
Ice Cube admitted that losing Eazy without closure hit him deeply. For all the disses and headlines, it was never about destroying Eazy. It was about reclaiming respect. In the end, Cube didn't chase chaos or revenge. He made his point and moved forward, leaving his legacy to speak for itself. That's who Ice Cube really was. Deliberate, strategic, and ruthless when he needed to be, but not cruel. The feud that began with money and betrayal ended with silence and reflection. It became a lesson on power, pride, and how fast loyalty can turn into loss. And though the two never got to reconcile, their story remains one of the most defining and human rivalries in hip-hop history. Second on the list is Common. In 1994, Common released his now classic track, I Used to Love H.E.R., a poetic masterpiece that used the metaphor of a woman to represent the evolution of hip-hop itself. The song was deep, reflective, and full of layered meaning. But 2 lines stirred a storm. She broke to the West Coast, and I wasn't salty she was with the boys in the hood. To most listeners, it sounded like clever wordplay. To Ice Cube, though, it sounded like a personal attack.
You know, to me, that was foul.
At that time, Cube stood as one of the strongest voices of West Coast rap, a man who had redefined hip-hop with NWA and later carried that same raw, unapologetic attitude into his solo career. To him, Common's lyrics weren't a compliment to hip-hop's growth. They were a critique of what the West had built, an accusation that gangsta rap had corrupted the soul of the genre, and Cube wasn't about to let that slide. Instead of brushing it off, Cube responded through Mac 10's track West Side Slaughterhouse. His verses came sharp and dismissive, making it clear that he took the song as disrespect toward the entire West Coast movement. It was more than a musical disagreement. It was a matter of pride, culture, and territory. But Common didn't back down. He struck back with The Bitchin' You, a blistering diss produced by Pete Rock.
And then, Common came back with a record.
A mean one. That's a mean one.
Yeah.
The Pete Rock.
It's all right.
The song directly called out Cube, questioning his integrity, mocking his film career, and even challenging his street credibility. Common, known at the time for being a conscious rapper, showed he could go toe-to-toe with one of the fiercest lyricists in the game. The feud began as a lyrical sparring match, but it soon started to feel dangerous. Years later, Common revealed that their rivalry nearly escalated into a physical confrontation during an encounter in Atlanta. "Man, this might get ugly," he recalled, describing the intensity in the room. The tension between the two had crossed from music into real life, echoing the violent atmosphere of the East Coast-West Coast feud that had already claimed too many lives. That's when Minister Louis Farrakhan stepped in. Seeing how the hostility in rap culture was growing out of control, he invited both sides to a peace summit at the Nation of Islam headquarters in Chicago. The meeting was historic. Artists like Snoop Dogg, Mac 10, Bone Thugs-n-Harmony, 2 Hort, and Fat Joe were in attendance, each recognizing that the culture needed healing more than another rivalry. By the end of that meeting, Ice Cube and Common shook hands. What began as lyrical warfare turned into mutual respect. Years later, both men would reflect on that chapter as a turning point, not just for themselves, but for hip-hop as a whole. It proved that even in a genre born from competition, growth and maturity could win over ego. And while the beef was squashed, it was just one of many chapters in Ice Cube's long history of clashes. Because for Cube, every rivalry came with lessons about respect, power, and legacy. Cypress Hill takes the 3rd spot. In the mid-90s, a storm was brewing within the West Coast rap scene, one that blurred the line between homage and theft. What began as creative overlap quickly spiraled into one of the most heated disputes of Ice Cube's career. At the center of it all stood Cypress Hill, a group that felt their art had been stolen and repackaged without acknowledgement. The spark came in 1995, when Cypress Hill released their single "Throw Your Set in the Air." Months later, Ice Cube's blockbuster movie Friday hit theaters, and its title track carried a hook that sounded suspiciously familiar. To Be Real and DJ Muggs, it wasn't just similar, it was the same idea, lifted straight from their record and turned into a mainstream anthem. What hurt most wasn't the creativity, but the lack of credit. These were artists who had built their identity on originality and authenticity. To see a piece of their work used by someone they respected felt like betrayal. Cypress Hill didn't stay silent. They channeled their frustration into music, dropping No Rest for the Wicked, a fierce diss track that tore into Cube's reputation and questioned his integrity. The lyrics painted him as someone who took from others and cashed in, a harsh accusation in a culture built on self-expression and respect. The shots were clear, direct, and public. Suddenly, what could have been handled privately was now one of the biggest beefs in hip-hop. Ice Cube, never one to retreat, came back swinging. Through his supergroup Westside Connection, he released King of the Hill, a thunderous rebuttal that called out Cypress Hill's credibility and ridiculed their accusations. Cube reminded everyone why he was one of the most feared voices in rap: sharp-tongued, commanding, and unapologetically confrontational. For him, the claim of theft was laughable. He saw himself not as a copycat, but as the very blueprint of the West. As the songs flew back and forth, the feud grew beyond just the artists involved. Hip-hop magazines broke down every lyric like court evidence. Radio shows debated who had the stronger response. Fans divided into factions: those who believed Cube had crossed the line, and those who thought Cypress Hill had overreacted. It became more than a music dispute. It was a cultural clash over ownership and authenticity. Who truly represented the West Coast, and who was profiting from it? Looking back, that feud stands as a reminder of how fragile respect can be in an industry built on pride. Even among pioneers from the same coast, loyalty could crack when money and recognition were on the line. And for Ice Cube and Cypress Hill, that crack never fully healed. At number 4 is Dr. Dre. There's a saying in hip-hop: loyalty can make legends, but betrayal can break them. And for Ice Cube and Dr. Dre, That truth defined one of rap's most complex relationships, a brotherhood turned Cold War. When Ice Cube decided to walk away from NWA, it wasn't just about contracts or cash. It was about principle. He believed the group's manager, Jerry Heller, and Eazy-E were taking advantage of everyone's success, and he refused to play along. But when Dre chose to stay behind, that choice spoke volumes. To Cube, it wasn't just business, it was personal. Dre's silence felt like an endorsement of the very system Cube was fighting against. The tension didn't explode overnight. It began with subtle shade. Dre's verse on Real Niggas included the pointed line, "We started out with too much cargo," a slick way of saying Cube had been dead weight. Soon after came Message to BA, a skit laced with mockery and inside jokes at Cube's expense. For outsiders, it sounded like typical rap banter. For those who knew the history, it was a public taunt that cut deep. Ice Cube wasn't one to hold back. His answer came swiftly and brutally in No Vaseline. The track was already a scorched earth response to NWA and their management, but Cube made sure to slip in a line directed at Dre, telling him to stick to producing. It was brief, but it hit hard. That single jab drew a line between them, a reminder that while Dre might have been the architect of the beats, Cube was the voice of rebellion. Unlike other high-profile rap feuds that turned into explosive wars of words, the Dre-Cube rift simmered in silence. There were no public blow-ups, no social media outbursts. It was more of an emotional stalemate. Two men who had once changed music together now existing in separate worlds. It was a Cold War built on pride, disappointment, and quiet acknowledgement that both had needed the other to become who they were. But time, as it often does, softened the edges. Decades passed, and both men became icons in their own right. Dre as a billionaire producer and mogul, Cube as a film star and cultural voice. The past didn't erase itself, but the bitterness faded. Then in 2016, hip-hop witnessed something fans thought they'd never see. During the legendary Coachella performance that reunited surviving members of NWA, Ice Cube, and Dr. Dre stood side by side under the same lights. No disses, no tension, just mutual respect and history in motion. As the crowd roared, it wasn't just nostalgia, it was closure. That moment reminded everyone that beneath the rivalries and the rumors, there had always been brotherhood. Cube and Dre's journey wasn't about enemies turning friends, it was about growth, forgiveness, and the unspoken bond of two pioneers who helped define a generation. Lil Wayne takes the 5th spot. In hip-hop, one bar can spark a wildfire, and that's exactly what happened when Ice Cube dropped I Rep That West in 2010. The song came loaded with pride, defiance, and just enough edge to send fans into a frenzy. Within hours of its release, message boards, blogs, and social media platforms were buzzing with one bold claim. Ice Cube had just taken a shot at Lil Wayne. One fan even posted the single's artwork with the caption, "Ice Cube dissing Lil Wayne," and the theory spread like wildfire. At first glance, it wasn't hard to see why. During that period, Lil Wayne was one of the biggest rappers alive. And though he was born and raised in New Orleans, he was often seen repping West Coast sets, wearing red, and publicly affiliating with the Bloods. To some, it looked like Wayne was borrowing a culture he hadn't earned. So when Cube dropped the line, "Leave this fool a paraplegic. People around the world that think they want to bang. Don't get your ass caught up like Lil Wayne. I'm too West Coast for the West Coast." It felt like more than a warning. It felt like a direct message. Fans dissected the verse from every angle. To younger listeners, it was a simple name drop. A veteran reminding everyone who ran the West. But to hip-hop purists and longtime fans, it sounded like Cube was defending his coast's authenticity against outsiders. Wayne's jail stint in New York had recently ended, and his growing fascination with LA's street culture rubbed some West Coast OGs the wrong way. Cube, a man who had built his legacy on protecting the region's image, appeared to be drawing a clear boundary. Some things weren't meant to be imitated. As discussions raged online, theories multiplied. Twitter threads compared Cube's tone to his early battle energy. Reddit posts broke down each bar like evidence. Was Cube criticizing Wayne's use of gang symbolism, or was he sending a broader message about the new direction of rap, one that favored flash over authenticity? The speculation was endless, and the controversy only fueled more interest in the song. Then came the twist. In a later interview, Cube put the rumors to rest. He made it clear there was no bad blood between him and Lil Wayne. In fact, Cube went out of his way to praise him, saying, "You can't beat Lil Wayne," and adding that while he's proud of what he's done for hip-hop, he fully respects Wayne's greatness. It was a rare moment of humility from one of rap's toughest veterans. Still, that verse left a lasting impression. It wasn't just about Wayne, it was about a shift in hip-hop's culture. Cube's message was bigger than any single artist. He was reacting to an era he felt was drifting from its roots, one where loyalty, code, and identity were fading behind style and spectacle. "I Rep That West" wasn't just a flex. It was a reminder from Ice Cube that for all the changes in rap, some values should never get lost. Finally, at the bottom of the list is Cam. In the rap world, betrayal often comes from rivals. But for Ice Cube, one of his most painful conflicts came from within his own bloodline. His cousin Cam wasn't just family. He was once Cube's trusted ally, part of the inner circle that helped craft the socially conscious, militant image that defined Cube's early solo career. Together, they stood for unity, empowerment, and Black pride. But somewhere along the way, loyalty turned into resentment, and admiration turned into rivalry. According to Cam, the trouble began when he signed under Ice Cube's label. At first, everything looked promising. Cam was talented, respected, and poised to be the next big voice from the West. But as time went on, Cam claimed that Cube didn't give him the spotlight he deserved. The support he expected never came, and opportunities seemed to pass him by. Cam later alleged that Cube saw him as competition, that his cousin recognized his lyrical power and stage presence, but chose to keep him in the background rather than let him rise beside him.
It wasn't really, he didn't do me bad. Like, my biggest gripe wasn't really that big, which was not promoting me. Like, if you're a tight artist and you sign to another tight artist that's still in the game, that's trying to compete for the limelight, then it's gonna be a kind of conflict because we naturally egotistic.
As months turned into years, Cam's patience wore thin. What had started as quiet frustration evolved into open anger. He felt sidelined, trapped in the shadow of his own family. Eventually, he broke away from Cube's camp completely, determined to make his voice heard, even if it meant turning that voice against his cousin. What followed was one of the most personal feuds in West Coast hip-hop. Cam released several diss records aimed directly at Ice Cube, with the most explosive being Whoop Whoop. In it, he didn't hold back. His bars were sharp, emotional, and laced with years of pent-up bitterness. "I put my trust in you like the OJ jury, but you dissed, so feel my fists of fury," he rapped, before taking even harsher shots at Cube's image and ego. It wasn't just a diss track, it was a public declaration of betrayal from someone who knew Cube better than most. For fans, the feud was heartbreaking. This wasn't two rappers competing for dominance, it was family tearing each other down. But in the years that followed, the tone changed. Cam began to look back on the situation with more understanding. In interviews, he admitted that much of the feud stemmed from miscommunication and misunderstanding. He acknowledged that both sides had acted out of pride and frustration rather than truth. Cube, he realized, wasn't intentionally holding him back. He simply didn't know how to manage Cam's ambition and energy within his own growing empire. Eventually, time did what fame couldn't. It healed. The cousins reconnected, talked through their past, and found a sense of closure. They didn't just bury the hatchet, they gained perspective. What began as a family feud fueled by ego and disappointment ended with reconciliation and respect. In a culture where beefs often end in tragedy, Ice Cube and Cam's story stood out, proof that even in hip-hop, forgiveness can still have the last word. In the end, Ice Cube's story isn't just about music or fame, it's about power, pride, and principles. Every feud, every fallout, and every reunion reveals a man who never bowed to pressure, never chased trends, and never apologized for standing his ground. Whether it was family, friends, or fellow icons, Cube treated every challenge like another verse, something to conquer with skill and conviction. His legacy isn't defined by the enemies he made, but by how he faced them, head-on, without fear, and always on his own terms. If you made it this far, you're clearly built for hip-hop history, but which Ice Cube feud shocked you the most?